The Screaming Silence. Chapter 1. Whispers in the Walls. It began with a whisper, barely audible like a breeze brushing through the cracks in the old farmhouse walls. Alina shifted in her bed, eyes wide open in the dark, listening. The wind outside was still. The trees didn't rustle, yet the whispers continued. They were faint at first, like fragments of forgotten conversations. She could never quite make out the words, but the tone was pleading, desperate. As the nights passed, the whispers grew louder, more urgent, almost angry. Her parents claimed it was the house settling, but Alina knew better. The house was trying to speak. Drawn by the voices, she pressed her ear against the faded wallpaper and held her breath. There, again, a hushed name, Leena. It wasn't hers, but it was close. Alina began to notice other things, cold spots that followed her down the hall, pictures tilting on their own, shadows that moved against the grain of light. The whispers turned into cries, and one night, etched into the wall by her bed, was a message in tiny, spidery handwriting. Help her before it's too late. But who was her, and why did the house think Alina could help? The silence that followed was heavier than the screams. Chapter 2. The Locked Room. The door at the end of the hallway had always been shut. No one talked about it, not her parents, not the real estate agent, not even the neighbors. It was as though the room didn't exist. One afternoon, while her parents were out, Alina walked slowly toward it. Dust floated lazily in the sunlight streaming through the window, making the hallway seem dreamlike. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the doorknob. It was locked. Of course it was. But as soon as she turned to walk away, she heard it. A knock. From the other side. Frozen, she stared at the door. Another knock, soft but deliberate. Then a voice, muffled and childlike. "Please, I'm cold." Alina's breath caught in her throat. She ran to find something, anything that might open it. When she returned with a rusted old key she'd found in the attic weeks ago, the hallway was darker, colder. The key fit. The door creaked open to reveal a small, dust-covered room. Toys were scattered on the floor, untouched for years. A child's bed stood in the corner, sheets draped like a shroud. And on the far wall, drawn in crayon, was the same message from her bedroom. Help her before it's too late. The whispers had led her here, but something else was waiting. Something that never left the room. Chapter 3. Footsteps at Midnight. The nights were no longer quiet. Every midnight, like clockwork, the footsteps began. Slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth just outside Alina's door. At first, she thought it was her father, checking on the creaks of the house. But when she asked him one morning, he frowned. "We never leave our room after 11, he said. "Not since we moved in." That night, Alina stayed awake. The footsteps began again, closer this time. She gathered her courage and opened the door. No one. But the footsteps didn't stop. They continued down the hall, turning sharply toward the staircase. Alina followed, heart pounding in her ears. The stairs creaked under invisible weight. She gripped the banister, following the sound down into the pitch-dark living room. And there in the middle of the room, The sound stopped. Silence. Cold, unnatural silence. Then, behind her, a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." The lights flickered. The fireplace lit itself with a violent crackle, revealing a shadow, tall and still, standing by the piano. It didn't move, didn't breathe, and when she blinked, it was gone. But the piano played a single, chilling note on its own. Chapter 4. The Mirror Doesn't Lie. The mirror in Alina's room had never shown her reflection quite right. Her movements were mirrored, yes, but there was always a delay, a flicker too long, a blink too slow. One morning, while brushing her hair, she noticed something chilling. Her reflection was still smiling, even after she had stopped. Frozen, she stared. The smile slowly faded, replaced by something darker. An expression that wasn't hers. She stepped back, heart racing. The figure in the mirror didn't. Her time was up, mistakes were made. That night, unable to sleep, she covered the mirror with an old bedsheet. But the next morning, the sheet was on the floor, neatly folded, and written across the glass in condensation were the words, "See what you really are." Terrified, Alina dug through old family photos, looking for any trace of the mirror, anything that might explain its presence. In a black and white photo of the house dated 1924, she found it. Same mirror, same frame, same spot, and standing in front of it was a little girl who looked just like her. But her eyes were completely black. The mirror hadn't followed Alina into the house. It had been waiting for her. Chapter 5. A Voice Without a Face. It started with her name being spoken. Alina would hear it softly, like a breeze against her ear, gentle, almost loving. Alina. No one else heard it. The voice followed her through the house, in the kitchen while washing dishes, in the bathroom mirror while brushing her teeth, in her dreams where the voice became louder, more commanding. Find her. Alina began writing down what she heard. Sentences formed in her mind that weren't her own. She's buried. She's cold. She wants to come home. One night, the voice was waiting before she even fell asleep. In the cellar, it said, clear as glass. She's in the dark. Alina jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Her room was dark, but she wasn't alone. A pressure sat at the edge of her bed. The air grew thick with something unseen. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The voice whispered again, softer this time. Help me remember who I was. Alina forced herself up and ran to the cellar door. It was already open. Chapter 6. Beneath the Floorboards. Alina stood at the top of the cellar stairs, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The beam cut through the musty darkness, revealing cobwebs, old crates, and forgotten furniture. But something else lingered there. An energy, a heaviness. She descended slowly, each step creaking under her weight. The air was damp and smelled of earth and rust. At the bottom, she paused. The flashlight flickered, then steadied. The voice was gone, but in its place was something worse. Silence. She stepped carefully across the concrete floor, eyes scanning the shadows. Then she saw it. A small section of the floor that looked newer, cleaner, like it had been disturbed. Kneeling, she brushed away dust and dirt, revealing wooden floorboards beneath. She pried one loose and screamed. Beneath the boards lay a child's shoe, faded pink, worn at the heel, and beside it, the corner of a yellowed cloth doll, its stitched eyes barely visible. She uncovered more. Bones, tiny brittle bones. Alina stumbled back, covering her mouth. The flashlight slipped from her hand, spinning across the floor and casting dancing shadows on the walls. One shadow broke away from the rest and moved toward her. A chill ran down her spine as a whisper returned, closer, colder. Now you see. Chapter 7. Forgotten Photographs. Alina couldn't stop thinking about the doll and the bones. The cellar had become a place of truth, a place where the silence screamed louder than any voice. She needed answers, real ones, the kind no one in the house was willing to give. She climbed into the attic the next morning, the old wooden ladder groaning beneath her weight. Cobwebs clung to her sweater as she searched the dust-choked space. Her fingers brushed past old trunks, discarded furniture, and boxes sealed with yellowing tape. The air was still, yet something about it buzzed, like old energy lingering in forgotten corners. She found old toys, baby shoes, dusty journals with unreadable names. But then she found it, a leather-bound album wedged between two beams, coated in dust thick enough to blur the gold-embossed initials on its cover. Inside were black and white photographs, faded, eerie, and strange. Some were of the house, unchanged through the decades. Others showed a little girl with braided hair, always staring into the camera with an expressionless face. There was a heaviness in her eyes, as if she knew she would never grow older. Alina flipped through the pages slowly, each one more unsettling than the last. One photo showed the girl in the kitchen, standing beside an oven that was no longer there. Another had her crouched in the cellar, her doll in hand, pointing to something scratched on the wall. Then she froze. The girl was standing in front of the mirror, the same mirror in her room. In another photo, she was holding the same doll Alina found in the cellar. But it was the final photo that turned her blood to ice. Nearly hidden in the back cover, tucked beneath a torn flap, was a picture of her own family, posed on the front porch of the house. Alina, her mother, and her father. But it was dated 1963, before they were even born. Alina looked closer. Her face was the same. Her parents looked exactly as they did now. It was like they had always been here, trapped in a loop, a haunting that recycled itself, a memory retold by the house again and again until it became truth. She felt something behind her shift, a coldness brushing her spine. Then she noticed one more thing. In every photo of the little girl, her eyes looked at the camera, except one. In one photo, the girl's gaze was off to the side, staring directly at Alina. Behind her, in the attic's shadows, a camera shutter clicked. Someone or something had just taken her picture. She spun around, nothing but darkness. But the album in her hand had a new page, still warm. Chapter 8. Her name was never spoken. That night, Alina sat at the kitchen table, the photo album open beside her, trying to make sense of what she'd seen. The pages still felt warm, like the memories inside hadn't finished unfolding. Her mother entered, eyes tired, hands trembling slightly as she poured tea into a cracked mug. The soft hiss of the kettle was the only sound breaking the stillness. "Where did you find that?" her mother asked, nodding toward the album. "In the attic," Alina replied. "Why didn't you ever tell me about the girl?" Her mother froze, tea sloshing slightly in the cup. "We don't talk about her, but she doesn't want to be remembered." Alina stared at her mother, heart thudding, but who was she? Her mother looked away, eyes glassy. She took a trembling sip of tea, then whispered, "She was the silence between every word we never said." That night, the house seemed to hold its breath. The wind outside didn't stir the trees. The walls, which always seemed to creak and groan, were utterly still. Alina returned to the locked room. The air was thick, warmer than usual, almost humid. The doll was gone. In its place lay a folded piece of paper, brittle and stained with age. On it, scrawled in a child's shaky handwriting, were the words, "Don't say her name, she hears it." Alina sat on the edge of the small bed, her fingers trembling around the note. She could feel the silence pressing in, a kind of silence that waits, watches. She read the name again and again in her mind, and then she said it quietly, as if testing the truth. "Leena." The house responded. A long, low groan echoed through the walls, like the house exhaling after holding its breath for years. The door slammed shut behind her. The light bulb overhead flickered violently before bursting with a pop. A whisper hissed through the room, like steam escaping from a pressure valve. "You called me." The mirror cracked in her bedroom upstairs. Downstairs, her mother screamed, a sound filled with a grief too old for words. Alina stood frozen as shadows spilled from the corners of the room. A shadow detached itself from the wall, small, delicate, a girl's shape. And then the shadow spoke again. "Now you belong to me too." Alina finally understood. Some names aren't forgotten. They're buried, and some are meant to stay that way. Even whispering them digs the grave deeper. Chapter 9. The Silence That Screams. Alina's world tilted. Since the moment she spoke Leena's name, the house had changed. Walls seemed to breathe. Lights blinked even when unplugged. Doors creaked open without warning, and the silence between each sound was no longer empty. It pulsed, alive and aware. It wasn't just haunted. It was listening. Her mother wouldn't speak. She sat in the living room, rocking in her chair, humming an off-key lullaby that never ended. Her eyes were open but vacant, the same tune repeated over and over, as if it were holding her together. Her father was nowhere to be found. His coat still hung by the door, but no one had seen him for days. At nightfall, the air inside the house changed. Alina could feel it pressing against her skin, thick, electric, charged with something ancient and unfinished. The silence wasn't quiet anymore. It had a shape, a rhythm, like breathing or weeping. The voices returned that night, but this time, they weren't whispers. They were screams. It began with one long, piercing shriek that tore through the house like shattered glass. Then another. Then dozens. Eleni sat up in bed, heart hammering, blood roaring in her ears. The noise came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, from everywhere and nowhere. She covered her ears and ran through the hallway where picture frames had fallen face down, through the kitchen where the faucet gushed water on its own, into the cellar where darkness clung to the walls like mold. She ran up the attic stairs, gasping, crying, calling for someone. But there was no escape. The screams followed. They lived in the walls now. In the attic, the temperature dropped. Frost bloomed across the windows despite the summer heat. Her breath clouded in front of her as she reached the far wall. There, scratched violently into the wood, were jagged words. She screamed and no one came. Alina turned slowly, her flashlight flickering. The mirror in her room, visible through the attic floorboards, had shattered completely. It didn't fall naturally. It imploded, pulling the shards inward as if something had broken out from the other side. And beneath the shards, written in red ink she couldn't tell, was a single question. Will you? The house fell utterly silent. The kind of silence that crushed you under its weight. It wasn't asking. It was demanding. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It begged for an answer. It screamed for it. Chapter 10. Shadows in the Attic. The attic no longer felt like part of the house. It breathed differently, stale, but heavy with the weight of memory. Alina stood at the top of the stairs, flashlight in hand, eyes scanning the beams and broken furniture. The wood groaned beneath her step, as if protesting her presence. Dust motes danced in the beam of her light like whispers made visible. Every corner held a shadow that didn't quite belong. Shapes that didn't move but seemed to wait. Watch. She stepped carefully, avoiding the boards that creaked too loudly. Her breath puffed in the air like smoke despite the heat of summer. The attic was colder than the rest of the house, as if it existed outside of time. Then something moved in the far corner, a shape too large to be a rat, too silent to be human. It shifted just out of reach of the flashlight's beam. She pointed her light, heart pounding. Nothing, but the smell of chalk and candle wax filled her nose, a strange combination of childhood and ritual. Then she saw it, handprints on the dusty floorboards, small, childlike, leading toward the back wall. She followed them, each step heavier than the last. Her hand brushed cobwebs aside until her fingers struck something solid, an outline she hadn't noticed before. A hidden door. She pulled it open slowly. It creaked like something sighing in relief. Behind it, a narrow crawl space barely big enough for her to slide through. She hesitated, then entered, heart thudding like war drums. Inside, the air was stiller, heavier. The walls were lined with drawings, hundreds of them, crude crayon figures, all of the same girl, the same face, over and over. Some were scratched out, Others had dark red marks where the eyes should be. She'd crawled deeper. The drawings told a story. A girl alone, crying, screaming, being ignored. Then a girl who changed, who became something else. Something that watched others. In the last drawing, the girl was holding hands with someone else. Alina dropped the flashlight. It clattered, but didn't go out. Suddenly, the light dimmed to a flicker. A low hum filled the crawl space, like a lullaby played in reverse. She turned. The exit had vanished. In the pitch black, she heard a faint giggle, then footsteps, slow and deliberate, crawling toward her from the dark. Then a breath against her neck. "I knew you'd come." A hand touched her shoulder, cold, familiar. The shadows weren't watching anymore. They were welcoming her home. Chapter 11. The Last Phone Call. Alina hadn't used the landline since they moved in. It sat in the hallway on a small table, dusty and outdated, its cord tangled like forgotten memories. It had become nothing more than a decoration, silent, dead. But tonight, it rang. The shrill sound cut through the silence like a scream in a cathedral. The air shifted, pressing in tight. Alina stood frozen in the living room, 1 foot mid-step, her breath held in her chest. 1 ring, 2, 3. She moved toward it as though drawn by a string. The hallway lights flickered above, shadows twitching along the walls. Her fingers hovered over the receiver. Her skin tingled. Something inside her whispered not to answer. She picked it up. Static. Then a voice, faint and fractured, as though climbing through static and time itself. "Alina, she's not done." Alina's stomach dropped. "Who is this?" More static, then clearer, colder. "You broke the silence. You brought her back." She clenched the receiver, knuckles pale. "Who's back?" Nothing. Only a low, rising hum. The tone deepened, took shape, became words, whispers, screams, a chorus of anguish layered so thick it vibrated the cord in her hand. She dropped the phone, but it didn't stop. The ringing continued even as the receiver lay on the floor. Then the cord lifted, coiling like a serpent, wrapping itself tightly around the base and dragging the handset back to the cradle with a snap. The lights above her burst, one by one, down the hallway. She turned to run, but her legs moved slow, as though wading through water. The wallpaper on the hallway walls began to peel, curling like old skin. The ringing now came from inside the walls, from beneath the floor, from her own chest. She covered her ears, but it didn't help. The ringing wasn't a sound anymore. It was a feeling, a vibration in her bones. The hallway darkened completely. And then the voice returned, close, whispering directly into her ear, though no one was there. "She heard you." The hum became a scream, and the scream became silence. It wasn't just a call. It was a summoning, and now it had begun. Chapter 12. Trapped Between Worlds. Alina didn't sleep. The phone's final scream echoed in her head long after it had gone quiet. Shadows clung to the corners of her vision, and each mirror in the house had cracked, even the ones tucked away in drawers. Even the silence felt louder now, like something was waiting to speak. The house felt thinner now, less solid, like if she pressed too hard against a wall, her hand might slip through. She tested it once, palm flat against the wallpaper. For a brief second she felt warmth, like a heartbeat beneath the surface. Then the breathing began. Not whispers this time, but labored, panicked inhalations. They came through the vents, the floorboards, the electrical outlets. The sound followed her from room to room, always just behind her, just out of sight. She pressed her ear to the floor. "Please," the voice cried. "She won't let me go." The voice was small, childlike, and filled with unbearable fear. Alina froze, then crawled across the floor like a detective chasing a heartbeat, trying to track it. It grew louder the farther she went from her bedroom. It led her to the back of the house, to a closet she rarely opened. Something about it always made her stomach twist. Inside, behind hanging coats, she found another door, smaller than the others. Wooden, splintered, as if it wasn't built for anyone fully alive. She hesitated, then opened it. The air changed instantly. Time slowed. Her breath came out in visible puffs, though the temperature hadn't dropped. Sound faded until all that remained was the thudding of her own heart. She stepped through. She was in a version of her home, but it was darker, older, decayed. The wallpaper curled inward like it was recoiling from her presence. The air was heavy with rot and mildew. The furniture was covered in white sheets that moved slightly, as if something was breathing underneath. Photographs on the wall had no faces, just smears where eyes and mouths should be. The lights flickered from gas lamps that had no flame. This place pulsed with memory, but not hers. She called out, "Leena?" A soft giggle responded. It echoed around her, stretching and bending like a child running through a hallway of mirrors. In the kitchen, the table was set for 3. Cups of tea sat steaming as if someone had just been there. The smell of something sweet lingered, but under it was something foul. Old blood and damp cloth. In the hallway mirror, Alina caught movement, but her reflection wasn't her own. It was Leena's, same eyes, same clothes. But she was smiling. Leena's world, built from echoes, fueled by silence, trapped, and now Alina was too. Chapter 13, A Diary of the Damned. The air in Leena's world was thick with memory. Alina walked through the darkened halls of the mirror home, where clocks ticked backward and chandeliers swayed without wind. Portraits along the corridors seemed to shift when she passed, eyes following her, expressions subtly changing. The wallpaper peeled in long curling strips, revealing something like skin beneath. Everything was quieter here, but not peaceful, more like a breath held for too long. Each step she took echoed too long, like the house was replaying her movements. She moved carefully, senses sharp, heart pounding like a ticking clock trapped in her chest. In the nursery, she found a diary. Its cover was worn leather, etched with a single initial, Lel. The leather was cracked and soft, and the smell of old ink and mildew filled her nose as she opened it. Inside, the handwriting was small, rushed, desperate. Page after page chronicled fear, loneliness, and punishments that didn't match any reality Alina knew. She locks me in the dark. She says I'm not real. If I scream, she laughs. Each line grew more frantic. Some pages had been written over multiple times, the ink bleeding through. On others, scratch marks dug deep into the paper. Alina turned another page and saw her own name. Alina is coming. I dream about her. She will see me. She staggered back, nearly dropping the book. Her fingers trembled as she clutched it tighter. The writing didn't stop there. The next few entries were less coherent, filled with scrawled drawings of two girls, one in the light, one in the dark, one whole, one broken. She flipped to the final entry. The ink was smeared, as if written in tears or blood. If you're reading this, don't believe her. She'll wear my face. She'll pretend to be you. But you're real. You're real. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. The candle beside the crib blew out, though there was no wind. Shadows gathered in the corners, thickening like storm clouds. Behind her, a shadow rose from the corner of the room, but it didn't crawl. It stood, calmly, watching her with knowing eyes, and it smiled with Alina's face. "Put it down," it whispered. "You've read enough." Alina backed away, clutching the diary like a shield. But the smile didn't fade. "I've been waiting a long time to be you." Chapter 14. Silence falls again. The shadow wore her face, but its eyes were hollow, bottomless pits that seemed to swallow the light. Alina stumbled backward as it stepped closer, silent, perfect, false. "You're not me," she whispered. The shadow tilted its head. "Aren't I?" it asked, voice distorted, echoing with 1,000 versions of her own. Alina turned and ran, through endless hallways that shifted behind her like breathing corridors. The air grew heavier with each step, thick like fog, and time stretched around her. Mirrors lined the walls, and in each reflection, the shadow followed her, sometimes ahead of her, sometimes behind, sometimes beside her, whispering in sync with her own breath. She slammed into a door. It opened into her bedroom, but not her real one. The bed was unmade. The walls were cracked. A version of herself sat on the edge, weeping into her hands. Alina reached out. "Who are you?" The weeping girl looked up. Her eyes were the same, but tired, worn. "I tried to stop her," she said, "but silence always returns. It always finds its way back through us." "Why me?" Alina asked, her voice barely audible. "Because you listened," the girl replied. "You opened the door." The room grew cold. The mirror on the wall shattered with a high-pitched ring, shards hovering mid-air before slowly falling like snow. Each piece reflected a different version of Alina, trapped, screaming silently. And then the house began to hum, not a sound, but a vibration, deep and pulsing like the echo of a heartbeat beneath the floorboards. The ceiling cracked, dust rained down. Shadows stretched from corners and coiled like smoke. From behind her came footsteps, soft, deliberate. Alina turned to see the shadow again, closer than ever. It reached for her, not with menace, but with familiarity, a twisted version of comfort. "You don't have to fight anymore," it said. "Let the silence take over. You'll never feel alone again." "No," Alina whispered, stepping back. "Alone is better than being erased." Suddenly, the door she'd entered through vanished. Walls closed in like a tightening throat. The weeping girl had vanished too. The house groaned. The walls rippled like water. Outside there was no sky, just black and silence. Alina pressed both hands to her chest and screamed, not in fear, but in defiance. A raw, primal cry that tore through the stillness like a blade. The vibration stopped, and the silence listened. For the first time, it felt uncertain. Alina stood tall, even as the ground quaked beneath her. She had cracked the pattern. She had shaken the silence, and it would never be the same again. Chapter 15. Echoes That Never Fade. Alina stood at the heart of the mirror world, surrounded by versions of herself, each twisted by fear, anger, regret. They whispered her name, begged her to stay, to forget who she was. But she held the diary to her chest, its final page burning in her mind. "You are real." The shadow approached, shifting and flickering like flame in wind. "Stay," it said, reaching out with a hand that mirrored her own. "We can be whole. One voice, one silence." Alina shook her head. "I'm not your echo." She turned to the door behind her, the one that had not been there before. It pulsed with light, warm and familiar. The shadow lunged. Alina ran. As she crossed the threshold, the house behind her began to collapse, walls folding inward, mirrors shattering, screams swallowed by an immense silence that cracked the air like thunder. She awoke on the floor of her real bedroom, the morning sun pouring through the window. Everything was still. The mirror was gone. The closet door was open. Downstairs, her mother was humming again, but this time, it was a lullaby Alina remembered from childhood. Soft, real. The scent of mint tea drifted from the kitchen, steeping warmly in her favorite mug. She rose slowly, her body aching as if she'd run for hours. As she walked to the bathroom, her reflection greeted her with familiarity. No flickers, no delay, just her. She stood there longer than usual, hands gripping the counter. She studied every inch of her face, searching for shadows, for cracks, for anything that might not belong. But there was nothing. Just Alina. In the hallway, framed photos lined the walls again. Some were new, some were different. One showed a young girl in a white dress standing in front of the old mirror. The glass was intact, but the girl's eyes were blurred, smudged by time or memory. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt respectful, like whatever had haunted them had found peace, or had simply stopped screaming. Still, sometimes Alina would hear faint echoes in the walls, not angry, not desperate, just there, watching. She took her tea and stepped outside into the early light. The air was crisp. The garden, untouched for years, had a few new blooms. She sat on the porch swing, listening to the birds, cradling the warmth of the mint tea in her hands. She had escaped, or been released, or maybe she had simply survived. Whatever truth remained behind the glass, she had walked through it. And it hadn't followed, but she would never stop listening, because sometimes silence, it waits.